Good afternoon. Welcome so very much to this important webinar today. I'm Reverend Carrie Jackson with Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice, and absolutely glad that you have joined us today. We have some amazing people who will be engaging this conversation with us about legislative strategies. And I'm going to introduce the moderator, who will then introduce our state legislature. Before I do so, however, I want to let you know this is the last of our winter series webinars. So we will take a break for the next few months, but please don't be alarmed. We will be coming back with webinars for this summer, and some exciting webinars we will have lined up for you very soon. In the interim, I invite you to look for the Learning Center courses that we will be launching within the next couple of months. We have some amazing courses that we believe everyone who is involved in any aspect of advocacy and justice work will be interested in participating in. So watch for the information about that. Today, we're going to be hearing from our panelists. Our moderator will we'll ask them some questions to which they will respond. We will take a short break, and by break, I mean that will be an opportunity for each of you to put in your questions, and we will have our panelists respond to those questions. And then the moderator will ask some additional questions, and then we'll have opportunity for you to ask some more. So what we are asking you to do, if you have some burning questions, and we hope that you will, please put those questions in the tab marked Q&A. Chat, we invite you to use for conversation among other individuals who are attending this, but if you want to ask a question, put that in the Q&A. And we encourage you to upvote the questions that are placed in there. And by upvote, I mean put a like, and that will help us know who has the questions that are the most pressing, because again, we want to respond to as many questions as we can. If we are not able to respond to your questions, we will take note of all of the questions that are raised today so that we can use those to help guide us in future topics that we might have for webinars or future collaborations with different organizations we might engage, et cetera, et cetera. So questions in the Q&A box, upvote them. We will be asking questions in midway through our webinar and then again toward the very end. And so now the last thing you will hear from me for a while is my introduction of my friend, Nancy Northup, who is the president and CEO of the Center for Reproductive Rights, where she has been since 2003. Under her leadership, the organization has become a global leader in using the power of law to advance reproductive rights as a fundamental human right. Prior to joining the center, Nancy was the founding director of Democracy Program at the Brennan Center for Justice at NYU School of Law, where she litigated voting rights, campaign finance reform, and ballot access cases. Nancy has been involved in a range of work where she has used the law to help forward more justice in people's lives. And for that, we thank her, because she could have done a number of things after she law clerked with Honorable Justice Rubin with the Fifth Circuit Court, et cetera, et cetera. But Nancy, thank you so very much for being here, and I will turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Reverend Jackson. It's so good to be here. I'm just thrilled to be doing this Religion and Repro Learning Center with RCRC. Very excited to do so, and very excited about today's panel. As Reverend Jackson was saying, the Center for Reproductive Rights works to ensure that reproductive rights are protected in law as fundamental rights by governments around the world. So here we have three lawmakers with us today, and that is exciting to me, because although some of our work is done in the courts, We also do a lot of work with legislatures and, of course, proactive legislation to increase people's access to reproductive health care and to reproductive decision-making is hugely important. And I want to, also say that our conversation today is going to be about the broad spectrum, and I hope your questions will as well, of access to reproductive health care. So we mean access to essential obstetrics and maternity care, access to contraception, access to safe and legal abortion, access to assisted reproduction for people who are seeking to form families. We want to think about the whole breadth. Sometimes there's so much politics around abortion that people think that reproductive health is only about abortion, but it's all about a spectrum of people's ability to make decisions about their reproductive health care and their reproductive lives. So with that, I want to introduce our terrific panel today. I will introduce you in reverse order to how long you've been serving in your state legislatures. So I'll start with Representative Maurice West. And he is a state representative serving his second term in the 67th House District in Rockville, Illinois. So he was first elected in 2019. He is a native of Rockford, and he's also an ordained minister in the Churches of God in Christ. That's not all. He's also an award-winning music composer and founder of the West Melodies. And, one of the things that in his, just when he first arrived on these issues in May of 2019, Illinois passed the Reproductive Health Act, which was really important. It rescinded 45-year-old regulations on abortion, which court injunctions had long blocked, including consent for abortions and criminally charging doctors if they perform the procedure. It requires insurance coverage, including for low-income women, for abortions, contraception, and related medical care. And Representative West, in his first year serving, was one of the men who spoke in favor of the legislation, and he talked on the floor about how he had received both death threats and other harassing, frightening things, but he stood up and was a champion. So good to have you with us today, Representative West. We also have with us today Representative Athena Salman of the Arizona House of Representatives from the 26th District, and she's also the minority whip in the Arizona House. She has authored a lot of legislation since she was first elected in 2016, but particularly relevant for today, the driving force behind House Bills 2510, 2693, and 2694. And these are bills which required employers to include contraception in their health insurance, allowed advanced practice clinicians to perform abortions, and called for the repeal of Arizona's trap law, which allowed for the criminalization of abortion. She also, in 2018, was promoting legislation to provide unlimited feminine hygiene products to incarcerated women. And this was initially heard in front of an all-male committee. And as a result of that, a viral campaign to pressure for immediate change ensued, leading to a policy change by the Arizona Department of Corrections that increased the allotment of pads and for the first time included tampons. So again, we're talking about the whole range of reproductive health care issues here today. And we're so glad to have you with us. And Senator John Marty is joining us from Minnesota, where he represents the 66th District, which includes Roseville, Lauderdale, Falcon Heights, and parts of St. Paul. Senator Marty first elected in 1986, so been at this for a long time. And he has distinguished himself as an independent-minded progressive. He has been a consistent voice on reproductive rights in these 30-some years, authoring legislation to protect access to abortion, pushing for comprehensive sex education, and the teaching of male sexual responsibility. And he led a tough campaign seeking to repeal Minnesota's parental notification law, which requires both parents to get consent before having or notification before obtaining an abortion. And of course, that can be very difficult depending on the family's circumstances, whether both parents can be notified. So we are so glad to have all three of you here today. And I want to kick off our first question, staying on proactive legislation. well, no, actually, let me ask my first question. Sorry, that's gonna be our second question. We'll come back to that. First question wants to be, how does your religious identity, however you identify yourself religiously, and by that I just mean you can be part of a religious denomination or an atheist or agnostic and not. We all have religious identities. I think one of the things that is not accurate about the discussion of religion and politics is this notion that only people affiliated with religious institutions have religious identities. All of us do. So whatever your religious identities, how do they inform, and the principles from them inform how you are as a legislator and a public official? So I'm going to throw that out there, and we'll go in reverse order this time, and then we'll mix it up the next time. So we'll start with Senator Marty.
Thank you, Nancy. Very pleased to be with you. And I'll start by saying where I come from religiously. I am the Lutheran. I'm a Lutheran Christian. My great-grandfather on my mom's side was a Lutheran minister. My grandfather on my mother's side was a Lutheran minister. My father was a Lutheran minister, a theologian, church historian. My brother is a Lutheran minister. My daughter is now a Lutheran minister. So I've got lots of generations of Lutheran ministry in our family, and I take my religious faith very seriously. And it influences who I am, and who I am influences how the types of legislation and so on I see. My parents, I grew up in the 1960s. My parents were active in the civil rights movement. My parents were active in the anti-poverty movement, the anti-war movement at the time. And they taught us, and our faith, my faith teaches me that we're supposed to be here to care for our neighbors, to love our neighbors as ourselves, and that everything we should do reflects the fact that the God who created us, she created us all in her image, and we're all supposed to treat each other as if we're fellow humans. And that's the way I try and live my life. That's the way I try and live out my politics. And so it does affect it. I do not feel my religious beliefs are something I'm supposed to be pushing on somebody else. A couple of years ago, I actually made it on Fox and Friends in a debate because I was fighting against a slogan that some people wanted to post, the quote national motto, "In God We Trust." They wanted to post that in our public schools. And I spoke against that on behalf of the 29% of Minnesotans who consider themselves religiously unaffiliated or atheist or whatever, and on behalf of the other 71% who do have religious beliefs. And I don't want my religious beliefs to be used as a bullying effort or a club against other people, which is what this was intended to be. So I very much believe that each one of us should bring whatever our religious values, our beliefs, whatever, and we should bring them in trying to build a better society. And that's the way we ought to deal with it. So we can get more into reproductive issues and reproductive health later, but I think in my mind, it's not, religion is something I do on Sunday mornings and the rest of the week I do whatever I want. I see it as shaping who I am and how I work in the legislative process.
Great. Well, thank you so much for kicking us off with that background. And I should just say that I share that perspective. I am a lifelong Unitarian Universalist, and I do the work that I do because of, not in spite of my faith. But we're also a very small religious denomination. There are less than 200,000 Unitarian Universalists in the United States. So the notion that one should not impose one's religion on someone else is something that has always been very important to me. And just, I always start with the first, principle of, respecting the inherent worth and dignity of every person. So that is where I'm coming from in this. And let me turn it now to you, Representative Salman, and tell us about how your orientation on this issue affects you as a legislator and a leader.
Yeah, thank you so much for having this morning on the panel and for the introduction. It's such a joy to be in really good company, especially considering the extreme legislation on this issue that I have to deal with, just given the nature of who's controlling the legislature here in Arizona. So for me, it's interesting because I am one of few openly atheist state representatives and state legislators throughout the country. During my first term, I was actually the only openly atheist female legislator in the country, although that has since changed with Megan Hunt in Nebraska, which is very exciting. But so I've grown up with this strong sense of there needing to be a very firm wall of separation between religion and government. And that is not only just to protect the rights of individuals like myself who lead moral lives without God, but it also is to protect individuals who come from minority religious traditions. In my own family, there are people who are atheist, agnostic. There are people who are German Catholic, Mexican Catholic. There are people who are Muslim. But what has always interconnected us and what has always held true in my household, and as I carry myself as an elected official, is that in this country, all of that is something to be cherished and celebrate, not cherry picked of who gets preferential treatment by the government and which religious traditions get left out. And so in my work in the state legislature, including on reproductive freedom, I govern from that intersectional lens, and I try to lift up voices and perspectives from all different faith backgrounds and traditions, because I think that part of the role of government is to make sure no one's getting that preferential treatment. So when it comes to reproductive freedom and justice, I think the role of government is to just make sure that abortion, first and foremost, abortion care is legal and safe. But then secondarily, it is our job as elected officials to make sure that for individuals who are seeking information, for individuals who are trying to decide what reproductive health care choices and options are available to them and is best suited for their lives, it is not my job to cast judgment. It is not my job to try and coerce people to make one choice over another. It is my job to make sure that that our society is providing those opportunities free of bias, especially if that bias is grounded in one person's or one faith tradition's religious ideology. So that is a little bit of background about myself and just kind of how I view and approach my role as a legislator, especially on reproductive health care issues.
Well, thank you. And also, it's stunning to the percentage of politicians who will acknowledge that they're atheists versus the population of the United States does not quite match up. And so certainly for you, very forthright in being clear about your beliefs and showing that leadership. And I think you made some national headlines, did you not, with the Humanist Prayer that you offered can you just tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll go on to speak to Representative West.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I think is common in a lot of legislatures and just governing bodies throughout the country is there's a requirement in the Arizona legislature that before we can conduct the day's business, we have to have a prayer. And so within that, again, in order for that to be constitutional, all different prayers or invocations have to be welcome. And so when I did a humanist prayer, my first term in 2017, the speaker ruled me out of order. And then subsequently, every year after that, the Republicans, not the Democrats, some of them do their own humanist or secular prayers unprompted, even though they're, not atheists or humanists per se. But whenever I have done a secular invocation or a humanist invocation, with the exception of last year, the Republicans have found ways to basically impugn me by using religion as their guise to discriminate against me as an atheist and as a humanist. So it's definitely, folks can go to my Wikipedia page and look up some of those dramatic events that have unfolded. But I think it's just, it goes and underscores the importance of making sure that we protect the secularism that is embedded in our government in this country, because even something as simple as a legislative prayer in my chamber has come under scrutiny and attack when it's not the type of prayer that the Republicans see fit, which is problematic.
Well, and it's also, your comments remind me about the fact that, of course, many of our founders were secular humanists, but a history we choose to forget. Representative West, to you, how does your religious beliefs and faith shape you as a public leader and legislative official?
Well, first, thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored to be here and be a panelist amongst Representative Salman and Senator Marty. Thank you for what you guys do in your respective states. I am a Holy Ghost preacher, as they would say in the Black church. I'm a Pentecostal preacher. And the way that it shapes me is I preach the gospel at all times, 24/7. And when necessary, I use words. And those times of using words are few and far between when I operate as a legislator. And so the gospel is preached within me by the way I operate, by the way the values that I uphold, by the way I interact with not just my colleagues in Springfield, which is the capital of Illinois, but more so my constituents, no matter where they stand on the religious spectrum or no matter where they stand on the political spectrum. The scriptures that I uphold says to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. And the second one is just as important, and I'm paraphrasing, love your neighbor as yourself. It doesn't say love your Christian neighbor. It doesn't say love your straight neighbor, your only the men who are neighbors. It says love your neighbor as yourself. And so that means what I do is I make sure I love every single person and every single person that I advocate for to ensure that they are able to receive life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, just as our Declaration of Independence for so stated. But when it comes to how I operate, I adopted a political manifesto. It's my personal political manifesto from John Wesley. He is the founder of the Methodist Church back in the 1700s. And he has 12 points, and I won't belabor the points because I don't, in respect of time, that I wholeheartedly adopt. And then from there, I decided to see if those values that I uphold, are they Republican in nature or Democratic in nature? And they happen to be Democratic. And so I mentioned that because I don't care about party systems. I love the way you said it, Senator Marty, independent progressive. People, I don't like slogans. Don't call me a progressive. I'm just me. I do what I can for the people. And if it happens to give me a 100% progressive or a socialist look to it, then whatever. I'm just going to keep doing me for the sake of the people I serve. But one of the things that my political manifesto, based on what John Wesley said in the 1700s, verbatim, promote equal treatment for women. He said that back in 1789. And so I said to myself, I need to make sure I promote equal treatment for women. One thing I learned when I first, and I have till the 27-minute mark, I made sure I looked at the time, 5 minutes. One thing I learned when I start running for this seat is Democrats were apprehensive about me as a candidate because I was a preacher, which was unheard of. Usually, in my experience, someone would trust you when you say you're a preacher. But Representative Salman, like you said, our Republican parties, they use Christianity, unfortunately, to scold folks, to really put chains on people. And it caused individuals to really be reluctant about Christianity, about religion as a whole. I remember last week, we had this bill that really expanded rights for transgender individuals. I mentioned in my committee hearing that I was a preacher. And then the fact that I saw their behavior, their nonverbals just, it closed off, and I couldn't be mad about it because it's what they've heard. And so my job is to preach the gospel at all times and when necessary, use words and let people see the light because I'm a preacher first, politician second. I was a preacher since 2011. Let them see that light within me by the love that I show with them, by the votes that I take on their behalf. And one of my favorite quotes, and I'll close with this, is from John Wesley again. Never dream of forcing people into the ways of God. Think yourself and let think. Use no constraint in matters of religion. Even those who are farthest out of the way, never compelled to come in by any means than reason, truth, and love. So I use reason, truth, and love. And I remember when I was in the capital of Illinois, I heard it plain as day, and I believe it was God speaking to me. This is not my house. This is the people's house. This is not my house. And so I stand firmly on the separation of church and state, and I stand firmly on render unto Caesar that which is Caesar, render unto God that which is God's.
Well, thank you. And also thank you for that inspirational reminder that our lives should be read in our actions and not just our words. It also made me think about the last comments that you're making, Representative West, speaking of Arizona. Senator Barry Goldwater, arch conservative in many ways, and the Republican nominee for president back in the day, he actually was furious about the attempt to legislate around things like abortion and other social issues, because he said there's nothing that people are less likely to change their minds about than religion. Right. And so I don't want you coming in my office, right, and telling me what I'm supposed to think. That politics should be about the things that we can compromise on, right? Things like whatever, customs duties and taxes and things like that. But asking people to give up their religious faith or try to legislate it, he was opposed to. So now we're going to go to a question, which I hope will be fun for all of you, is that you can imagine that by the wave of a wand, you could enact any new law in your state on reproductive, sexual health and rights. What would you choose to do and why? Why do you think it's important for your state? So we are going to start with Representative Salman with this question. You've got the wand.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So I was thinking about this since we are a legislature where the Republicans are in the majority. I mean, I'm hoping there's a bill that's caught up in House rules, a Senate bill that would allow individuals to purchase and get birth control over the counter. And the bill is written in such a way that if they have insurance coverage or if they're on Medicaid, that the birth control would still be covered, even though they're getting it out over the counter. And so I'm hoping that passes, but this is our third attempt at passing this legislation. And so even just an act of reducing and helping people plan out their pregnancy or try to not become pregnant, it comes through with heavy opposition. So that's one of the things that we're hoping to get that win this year, but to be determined. But if I had a magic wand, I would do more than just provide the access to contraception for our communities. I would love to see something like the Reproductive Health Act that has been introduced in multiple states that repeals and rolls back the trap laws. So almost like a repeal and replace, where we can, in a state like Arizona, roll back all the trap laws, remove the criminal provisions that existed before Roe v. Wade. We're one of the states that had a abortion ban that criminalizes women and doctors, not only for abortions, but also it's a misdemeanor to advertise contraception. So that's a fun one, especially for college students. So repealing all those laws, but I would love to see Arizona move in a direction where we are proactively protecting abortion care and reproductive health care affirmatively in statute. So the Reproductive Health Act, passed in New York, maybe modeled some provisions off of what passed in Virginia. But I think Arizona is one of those states where we're really prime for just building something from scratch, given that all that's happened on this topic over, especially over the past 10 years when former Governor Brewer became governor. She's the infamous governor that put her finger in Obama's face and signed the Show Me Your Papers SB 1070 law that resulted in a multi-year boycott against Arizona. So we also, I mean, an extreme conservative agenda oftentimes doesn't focus on one social issue. They are dismantling rights among a whole host and class of marginalized people. And unfortunately, since she was governor, that's when we saw the trend where Republicans really ratchet up the restrictions on abortion care and on reproductive health care access in the law. So I think the last piece in my dream world, if I may, is just we're one of the few states that doesn't provide state family planning dollars. So all of our family planning money comes from the federal government. So when Trump did the gag rule a few years ago, it was pretty devastating. And our providers had to figure out ways to still be able to operate. But I would love to, when Arizona's in a space where we can be more proactive, I would love for the state to move forward and establish a state grant for family planning services so that Arizonans can take advantage of that.
Great, well, thank you. And in case some of our listeners aren't familiar with the term TRAP laws, it stands for Targeted Regulation of Abortion Providers. And these are laws that have served no medical purpose. They don't advance women's health. They merely serve to be barriers, sometimes, hurdles too hard to get over to close clinics. So two of the cases that the Center for Reproductive Rights took to the Supreme Court, 2016 out of Texas, they had two big TRAP laws. One was requiring that every abortion provision, every clinic, be an ambulatory surgical center, which is not necessary for a medication abortion in the first 7 weeks, or a first trimester abortion, or even into the second. And it would have closed almost, all of the clinics, but a handful in the state of Texas. And the second was requiring that doctors have admitting privileges at a local hospital. And the Supreme Court also found that that served no purpose except for to exclude doctors that hospitals choose not to give privileges to, because it's not like a board certification. They have economic reasons why they approve or don't that you have admitting privileges. And abortion providers don't admit patients to hospitals. It's a pretty safe procedure. So we won that against Texas in 2016, against the state of Louisiana in 2020. So that was what was being referred to. And also I was going to say, many people might not realize that in many countries, birth control pills are available over the counter. So while it sounds radical here because we don't have it, it is actually safe and effective to be over the counter. Representative West, you now have the magic wand. You can enact any law that you like on sexual and reproductive health and rights. What would you prioritize?
That's a good question, and I want to segue with an apology in advance to Representative Salman. So here in Illinois, the Democrats have a supermajority in the House, a supermajority in the Senate. We have a governor who said we're going to be the most pro-choice state in the nation. So I don't have to worry about the things you're worried about. And so it was kind of hard to answer this question because we're working on making the wand wishes a reality here in Illinois. But a couple of things that we are working on, for example, sex education is not required in Illinois. So I'm a chief co-sponsor of a legislation this session to make age-appropriate sex education required in our state. I just passed out of the House the bill to add sexting to the schools that do have sex ed, talk about sexting and the ramifications that can come with sexting. And to my surprise, not much pushback on that, which is good. So we're working on this, making sex education a requirement. As you know, we just passed the Reproductive Health Act on 2 years ago in 2019. And we're also working currently on the PNA, Parental Notification Act. repeal the Parental Notification Act. And so those are still in the works, but at the same time, like I said, we have the supermajority throughout the whole state. Both of our United States senators are Democrats, and a majority of our congressional delegates are Democrats. So we have more freedom on what we can do, and so we're having those talks as we speak.
Great, well, thank you. So yes, do remind your colleagues that you've got the wand and that you are able to move through some terrific legislation. And you know, the issue about sex education and information is really important. And one of the things that, you know, people always think there's a lot of cultural similarities between, you know, Western Europe and the United States, but where we're really different is around attitudes about sexuality. And because of it, they have much better sex education and access to sexual and reproductive health care for young people in Western Europe. And their unintended pregnancy rates are much, much lower than here in the United States. So it's always important to remember that information is power, and we want to make sure that people have it. Senator Marty, you're going to close us out with your, you've had like 30 plus years to think about all the things that you might do. What would you like to do on sexual and reproductive health and rights?
Well, a lot of those things are things I've been trying over the years, and a lot of them haven't succeeded yet. Minnesota is closer to Arizona than Illinois in terms of our politics these days, and it's been tough. Again, you mentioned earlier that it fought against to modify, repeal our parental notification law, which was really onerous because you had to notify both parents. You still do. Even if the father was the one who made the young woman pregnant, you'd still have to tell them you were pregnant and you wanted an abortion, which is a dangerous situation. We have a lot of those trapped kind of laws here. And the fear and the hate that's being pushed by some of the other side gets it to the point where I talked with one woman a tiny woman who's the head of a women's clinic in Minnesota City, and that does provide abortions. And I spent a morning with her one day, and in her coat room in her office, she's got 2 bulletproof vests. She wears in a not big Minnesota City, she wears a bulletproof vest to work every day because it's unsafe. That's sad. That's tragic. We have to repeal this. So the first thing I do is repeal those harmful laws that are meant to criminalize and punish and try to put barriers in people getting the care they need. The second thing I do is a bill I've been working on for a good number of years. I call it an abortion prevention bill. And we dropped in a bill that would, first of all, provide much greater funding. Unlike Arizona, we do provide state funds to help with family planning, a significant amount, but far too insignificant to meet the needs. And I'm a big believer in universal health care, where people shouldn't have to qualify, have the right insurance, the right coverage, be able to pay the co-pays and everything else. And frankly, reproductive health care should be the same, and it would be part of that. And realistically, the idea that the other 2 representatives mentioned to me, why do we need prescriptions for birth control? Why do we need that? I mean, it's a couple of years ago, 10 years ago, when the Republicans took over both houses of our legislature for a couple of years, they were pushing a bill that would say that the abortion medication pill would have to be taken in front of a doctor. And I got out some numbers that showed that actually, if we were going to do that, then I was talking about maybe we should have an amendment to say anybody who takes Viagra has to take it in front of a doctor, which would create some pretty interesting situations. But the reality is Viagra is at least 5 or 10 times more dangerous than birth control pills. I mean, it's just bizarre the way they're talking about these issues. So first thing is to repeal those bad things. The second thing is that education and family planning services available everywhere. We talked about in this abortion prevention bill, we talked about wholesome after-school activities. And we meant that. I mean, you keep kids active and teach them how to care about each other, teaching male responsibility, teaching people to respect the sexuality of others, to respect their role as not domineering over people, but people who are supposed to care about each other. And I think comprehensive sexual sexuality education is critically important. And as Representative West said, age appropriate. And some people, oh yeah, they're going to have, and the fear mongers are always, they're going to be teaching kindergartners about condoms. You know, we started, my kids are grown, I got grandkids already now, but when our kids were little, I think we were talking about what you might call age appropriate sexuality education about age 2. Good touch, bad touch was the terminology they used back then. Yeah, you're not going to teach them what you're going to teach a middle school student or high school student. But the idea that if schools don't teach them, that they're not going to be involved in sexual activities, which is what some parents are afraid of. But the interesting thing is, even in a state like Minnesota, which has been fairly conservative on reproductive health issues, there's polls, official scientific polls been done by University of Minnesota over the years to see parental attitudes towards comprehensive sexuality education. The numbers aren't really that close. Even in the most conservative congressional districts of our state, it's 85, 90, 95% of the public who wants comprehensive factual sexuality education, not abstinence only, but comprehensive education. And I think it's partly because a lot of these parents are scared to talk with their own kids about it, and they want somebody who knows what they're talking about to do it. And the polls really show that. If you go ask people publicly in one of those rural conservative communities, you ask them publicly, do they want this? They're going to look around and somebody's watching, they might hear what I say, so they're going to say no. But you take a poll, overwhelmingly the people want that. And to me, my argument was that our abortion prevention bill would have done far more to reduce the number of abortions in Minnesota than all the activities of the quote pro-life movement have been doing in the last 50 years. And I think that's critically important. So my number one thing would be abortion prevention thing, which, forget the title from it, it's basically comprehensive sex ed and making sure family planning services are available for free to people throughout the country, throughout the state and nation. Actually, we need.
Great, well, thank you. And I will put in a plug here for the United Church of Christ and the Unitarian Universalists put out a comprehensive sex education program from cradle to grave called Our Whole Lives. So if any of our listeners want to take a look and haven't seen what a comprehensive, age appropriate for each stage in life sexuality education program is, you can check out Our Whole Lives. So Reverend Jackson, you know, we are at 4:45 and I'm thinking we might want to open. I think everyone actually spoke in the last go around about what some of the obstacles they have in their state, as well as what they'd like to do with the magic wand. So if we want to go to questions from, and reminding everyone, because I was supposed to keep reminding you to put your questions in the Q&A folder, and also to not upload, not upgrade,
upvote.
Upvote. I just learned that term yesterday, to upvote the questions that you like. But I think we could go to those and then we'll come back for some more discussion among the panelists. Does that make sense?
That sounds good. So I'm going to try to read these. We don't have any. Oh, so the upvoting is starting to come in now. Thank you very, very much. So Nancy, can you see them? I'm having just a
yes, let's see. I go to what says Q&A. Okay.
Yes.
And the upvoting just happens. The one at the top will be like,
yes,
upvoted.
Every time someone clicks
right.
a thumbs up, it helps move the question up.
Okay, this is exciting. I love the interactive nature of it. We need more of that here on Zoom. All right, I'm going to go with a question that starts with, where do you see commonalities between the anti-abortion legislators and movements in your different states? And where do you see opportunities for political progress in your states on abortion access and reproductive justice? Big question. I'm going to throw it out to whoever wants to answer first.
I can go first. So in Arizona, for a long time, the main organization that advanced anti-abortion policies is the Center for Arizona Policy, or CAP for short, and they're very closely aligned with the I think it's called the Conference of Catholic Bishops as well. When we're running for office, they share pretty much a survey for candidates to respond to. And within that includes, things like trying to stop bans on conversion therapy. There's a bill going through the legislature right now that's going to ban the banning of conversion therapy. Doing inaccurate sex education that emphasizes abstinence, and then obviously the abortion bans. So for a long time, the head of this organization was considered, there's 90 legislators in Arizona total, so we're a smaller legislature, 30 in the Senate, 60 in the House. And so this the director of this organization was considered the 91st legislator, especially when the Republicans had a supermajority. But now we are very narrow. There's only 31 Republicans in the House, 29 Democrats. In the Senate, there's only 16 Republicans, 14 Democrats. So if one Republican is off a bill, the bill can't move forward. But another organization that in these past over the past decade has really emerged not only as a big player in Arizona on this front, but also in probably your state, in states across the country, even weighing in and oppressing the LGBTQ communities in Europe, especially in Hungary, is the Alliance Defending Freedom. They're based in Scottsdale, Arizona. And so the Colorado bakery case, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the name of that case, that tried to strike down their non-discrimination ordinance and with the Civil Rights Division, it was the Alliance Defending Freedom that intervened in that case. And then they did the same thing with the city of Phoenix in Arizona and their non-discrimination ordinance and got that chipped away at by the Arizona Supreme Court. So yeah, a lot of these players have overlap, and then these conservative lawmakers convene on conferences like ALEC and CPAC and other national, and they kind of just swap ideas and they just talk to each other and they're like, how do we make this more restrictive? With the goal of we're seeing a lot of bills this year in Arizona with the goal of trying to get these unconstitutional abortion restrictions in front of the Supreme Court so that they can ultimately rewrite or just completely repeal the Roe v. Wade decision. So at least that answers the first part of the question of who some of these major players are. And yes, they are absolutely connected nationally, and I would argue globally as well.
I'll jump in quickly and say that I think that the groups are very closely tied, as Representative Salman said. There are a lot of similarities in the agenda they're pushing, and a lot of it's aimed at trying to get court challenges to the abortion, the court rulings, Roe v. Wade, and so on. But the one thing that they keep pushing is, the reason they keep pushing it is, to a large extent, I'd say it's because of politics. They think they can score political points. There have been Republican presidents since Roe v. Wade, probably 30 years plus of Republican presidents. And some of the times, like during Trump's first 2 years, they had control of both houses of Congress. They keep saying, well, we need to change the Supreme Court. We need to change the Supreme Court if we're going to get changed. No, you don't. All you have to do is amend the Constitution. And I'm not trying to say that's easy, but how many times did they try? I don't think they want to change it because they know it's such a good vote getter with certain parts of their base. They think it gets a lot of people behind them, rightly or wrongly. Conservatives and evangelicals were not all in the, quote, pro-life camp 50 years ago. That's been changing, and it's been used to create fear and to create, oh boy, they're evil people trying to do these horrific things. And the best way I can say it is, you got to go back to 1988, I think it was, presidential campaign, George H.W. Bush against Michael Dukakis. One of the debates, one of the questions was, if you think, to Bush was, if you think abortion should be illegal, you want to make it illegal, who are you going to punish, the women or their doctors? He said, oh, not the women, they're the victims, the doctors. Before that word left his mouth, his campaign manager was in the spin room with the media saying, he didn't mean that, he didn't mean that. Why? You really think people want to have doctors locked up for making a decision like this? And the whole point is, well, they want to express their opposition. They don't like abortion. And therefore, how do we show we don't like it? Well, let's make it illegal. But the public doesn't support that. So if they start pushing to do too much, in a lot of states, it's going to kill them off. And statewide, a lot of governors are a lot iffier on this than their Republican majorities because they need votes statewide. And so I think a lot of their push is based on their scoring political points with their base, and they're raising money off it and everything else. Not so much a deep-seated, we ought to make abortion illegal, because I think a lot of them realize the public doesn't support that.
Right. I think, consistent polling has been 70% of the public wants abortion to be safe and legal. And that's often different from how people identify themselves. If you ask them, do you identify, as pro-life or pro-choice, they might answer one way. But when they're asked the fundamental question about the law and what the law should be, which can be different than someone's identity as a person, 70% want it safe and legal. So that's a pretty super majority. And I think they're aware of that. What I think I will do is go to the next question, and then I'm going to throw it to you first, Representative West. So get ready. So the upvoted question is, I would like to know, they write, why no one has taken on the Supreme Court on the obvious violation of religious freedom by those who try to restrict access to abortion. The only possible argument that religious people have for restrictions on access to abortion is that of the existence of a soul. This is a religious belief, not a proven fact. Not everyone believes in this religious belief. Therefore, to restrict access to abortion is a violation of the rights of those who do not hold to the existence of a soul from the moment of conception, I think is the question. Since the existence of a soul cannot be proven beyond a reasonable doubt, restricting abortion to those who do not believe in something that cannot be proven to exist is the imposition of religion on others. Your thoughts on that question, Representative West?
I wholeheartedly agree with that. And I have the same question. Why hasn't anyone brought this up to the Supreme Court? Because that has been the topic of discussion a lot of times, especially in the Christian faith, moment of conception. They use scripture of I've known you since you were in the womb, and people love to take things out of context to satisfy their own desires and their own needs. And I often talk with my pro-life brothers and sisters who. It was funny that when you mentioned that I had death threats, one thing you did not mention those death threats came from members of the Christian faith. Had people come to my office and pray for me and pray a curse over my life. Lord, if he votes for this bill, may his future seed be compromised, is what they said. And so if people would take the time that they're using to try to legislate a woman's body, if they'll take that time and resources and flip it to where they are at providing resources to women, provide so that they are safe, so that they can understand what the necessary, the resources are out there. Then, like you mentioned earlier, if we talk about sex ed, we're more inclined to be more informed rather than influenced, but it's just a talking point. No one wants to capitalize on this moment because they need a talking point. And so I encourage whoever raised that question, you could be the first to bring it to the Supreme Court because it needs to happen.
So I will just, as the lawyer, I will jump in with a little law, and then we'll go on to discuss still the broad and interesting question that was asked.
And I want to jump in after you, Nancy.
You're going to jump in next, is that right?
After you.
Okay, great.
Go ahead.
All right. Reverend Jackson will jump in after me. So the Supreme Court did look at this issue in 1980, so 41 years ago, in a case called Harris versus McCrae. And this was a case brought to challenge the restrictions of the Hyde Amendment that denied women who were on Medicaid with access to medically necessary abortions. And in addition to bringing the case under the 14th Amendment, which is where the right exists in Roe versus Wade, they also brought challenges under the First Amendment, both in terms of establishment of religion and also the free exercise of religion. And these are, of course, are two different concepts in the First Amendment. One is that the government's not supposed to set up what religion we have to all believe. And the second is that we should be able to exercise our religious beliefs, freedom of worship, for example. And what the Supreme Court said was that, and this is sort of, black letter First Amendment law on establishment of religion, the fact that there's an overlap between particular religious perspective, say the Catholic Church's opposition to abortion, and a statute doesn't make it establishment of religion. On the free exercise of religion, they said, you don't have anybody who can bring that claim. So in court cases, it's called standing. You have to have a real dog in the fight, as it were. And they said, none of your plaintiffs here are somebody with a good faith religious belief that, is seeking an abortion and they can't exercise that because of the Hyde Amendment. So that question, the freedom of religion question, remains open. So should there be a plaintiff whose religious faith, for example, which is true of some religious faiths, that would say that you must prioritize the woman's life over fetal life, if there is a conflict there, and they were not able to access an abortion, they would have a claim if they were denied access to an abortion on a First Amendment freedom to practice religion claim. So that claim is out there. So if anybody, comes across anyone who could have standing to bring that claim, we stand ready and willing to bring that case. But there are other, I will say, we are litigating other cases now. Some states have passed these requirements that whether you miscarry or have an abortion, you have to either bury the fetal remains or the embryonic remains or have cremation. And we have put ministers on the stand in those cases to say this is an imposition of religion. And the courts have been deciding them on other grounds, but we're going to keep on trucking on those. All right, Reverend Jackson.
Yes, I want to say very quickly, we are in conversation now with the Columbia Law Rights and Religion Project around this very issue. And Elisa, thank you for raising that question, and all of you who upvoted it. And the scripture that Reverend West used about in your mother's womb, and this is a commercial I'm putting in here now, the text actually says, before you were in your mother's womb, I knew you. And so one of the things we will be doing, and this is the commercial piece, is with the courses in the Religion and Repro Learning Center, we will have a series of courses specifically looking at the issue of personhood. I think they will be some rich courses. We have them already. They will be rolling out very soon. And the issue of ensoulment is part of what we will be looking at. And whether there is soul or there isn't soul, should that be part of the conversation? If there is a soul, when does it connect with the physicality? Is it when the physical is liquid during those first weeks? Does it happen later? Does it happen at quickening? Does it happen at first breath? All of those are very, very important questions. And so thank you. Nancy, could we do one more question and then ask just one of the remaining questions to our panelists, and then we can get some more audience questions in. And you're on mute, Nancy.
Okay, we can. And it was a close upvoting going on, but I'm going to go with the most upvoted, if that is now a verb. Thank you all for your moral courage on this issue. How have stories from your constituents influenced your views on reproductive health? How do you make sure you're hearing from people who are the most impacted and not just those who express their views the loudest? So thank you. Excellent question.
Y'all mind if I go first, since that's a friend of mine from the grand city of Rockford, Illinois?
Yes, you go for it.
All right. Well, thank you, Reverend Violet. It's good to see you. I'm looking forward to our walks once the weather gets warmer. I'll have to be honest with you, if you could just, if I could be transparent. Going back to the RHA, the Reproductive Health Bill, their opponents were the loudest compared to the proponents. Thousands of calls came to my office, 5 or 6, came in support of the bill. And so I was a new legislator. I was scared of the repercussions behind it. And then I took pause and really reflected, prayed about it. And then I watched how things were transpiring in Ohio, Mississippi, other states. And it came down to, do I want to do what's right? Like JFK said, profile, with his book, A Profile of Courage, being courageous is about doing what's right rather than adhering to what the people want, or what the people feel is right, or what the opposition or whoever's the loudest. And so that's when I learned that I had to make sure that every vote I take, I have a reason behind it, a reason to why it's right. And I went from being a strong no to speaking on this bill in strong support of it. And it was the bill out of the thousands of buttons, times I voted on a bill in 2019, I had the most confidence on voting on the reproductive health bill, because I came to myself on what was right, rather than and being informed rather than being influenced.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much for that. And either Senator Marty or Senator.
I'll make one brief comment on it, and that is that, yes, our job is, some people see legislators as, quote, representing people almost as if we're polling machines. I don't think any of the three of us, I'll speak for myself, but I don't think any of us see that's our job. I think we are elected by people because they trust us and they trust our judgment. They think we're going to make wise choices. So often the most vocal people are the most misguided people. That's not necessarily true. It can be the opposite of that. But many times the volume of which they speak doesn't say anything to the merit of their cause. And what we're supposed to be doing is listening and thinking through what our values are, what we understand to be is the best interest of people. We're not supposed to vote for what's most popular for people, but what is in the public interest. And we're supposed to use our best judgment on that. And I think that's what I try and do. And if you don't, I mean, I've represented many times, I'm a Democrat, but I've often had, over my years, have had Republican leaning districts. And yeah, you get scared. I mean, yeah, of course you get scared when you're afraid you might lose because of something like that. But when you're confident what you're doing, you can educate and explain and teach. And I think that's part of our job as well. But yeah, if we go by the volume of how strongly people feel it, and as for the other part of the question about stories, yeah, those stories make a real difference. In our parental notification law, we had a young woman, parents of a young woman from Indiana, come all the way to Minnesota to testify. Their daughter, a 16-year-old straight A student, had a parental notification law like Minnesota's. And she was, even though the parents thought they had good relationship with her, and I think they did, she was scared to tell her parents because they were too proud of her, and felt she shamed them. And so rather than get their permission to have an abortion, she did a back alley job and she died from it. And they were coming in, and the story from that's 30 years ago. And I can tell you everything about that case. It was a tragedy. So we got to hear the stories, not the volume of who's telling them.
Great. And Representative Salman, do you want to comment on hearing from constituents and the storytelling and its importance?
If storytelling wasn't important and getting a diverse range of perspectives on an issue, then why are Republicans in the legislature and the Arizona House of Representatives constantly gaveling people out of order for not liking the content of their speech and not liking the points that they're raising? This year, so at the beginning of the session, we had this meeting on a Friday where we were just going to talk about like what reproductive proactive measures we can lift up this session and try to lay the groundwork for a future session where the Democrats are going to be in the majority. But then we started seeing bills like the most extreme bill that was introduced this year was applying the death penalty to women and doctors for getting an abortion or having or delivering abortion care. And so it created and it kind of organically became a reoccurring Friday meeting. And on this call, we have our local affiliate of National Council of Jewish Women. We have our secular coalition. We have our ACOG, our OBGYNs on this call. We have multiple national organizations that focus on reproductive justice on this weekly call. We have college students organizations. So it's a pretty diverse ACLU, our local affiliate, attorneys, and every single week we discuss like who are our messengers going to be for these bills, these bad bills that are moving through, and some of the things that we discussed today, like bringing up the First Amendment argument, the local Jewish community brought that up on several of these measures. This is violating my religious belief that life begins at birth. And so I think surrounding yourself for proactive, and if you're trying to stop bills, the strategy is still very similar in that the more perspectives you have, especially from people who are directly impacted as patients, as medical providers, your doctors, nurses, etc. But in a state like Arizona, we literally started calling prosecutors because we're seeing these bills that apply criminal penalties, and we're bringing their voices in, and we're pushing the Republicans and saying we've reached every. We call them county attorneys in our state. Some of you call them district attorneys, but we're literally talking about if Roe v. Wade falls, if this bill is law, how do you, prosecutor, intend to enforce this? Are you going to go after doctors? Are you going to go after women? And Republicans are very uncomfortable that we're having these conversations with beyond just their small circle, like Representative West and Senator Marty have described. Their coalition and the amount of people that actually want this is very small, and they want to stay in that echo chamber. They want to be loud because they want to create this false perception that Americans are clamoring for these restrictions and for attacks on reproductive freedom and trying to stop progress. And if you can bring a coalition that's even bigger and more diverse and really go at the issue at every angle, that's what makes winnable campaigns to stop something and to pass something.
Well, that is an excellent comment to go to our question that we're going to go back to the panel with. And that is about, and realizing there's a vast difference in the length of time that you've been in elected office, but how do you see today's sexual reproductive health and rights movement or the reproductive health justice and rights movement? Have you seen changes? Are you seeing the critical intersections between reproductive rights and other justice issues, such as immigration, healthcare, racial justice, minimum wage, housing, voting rights, etc.? So I think maybe we could go back to you first, Representative Salman, to say a little bit more about, are you seeing a change in how reproductive justice is fitting into a broad set of justice issues?
Yeah, absolutely. Arizona is considered a battleground state. It's something that we've worked incredibly hard to establish and achieve in the aftermath of SB 1070. So that intersectionalism cannot ring any more truer. Born out of as a phoenix out of those ashes was a generation, myself included, of Latinx activists, community organizers who started with megaphones yelling at the legislature, who wouldn't listen to us on any issue, including reproductive health care and abortion care. And we started organizing, we started getting Republicans kicked out of office, and then we started running for office. And we're at this precipice now where I would say the state is purple. The state is one, even though the Republicans in the legislature in Arizona are governing like they have a mandate, I'm sorry, being the closest margins that you've had in the legislature since 1966 is far from a mandate. And in 2 election cycles, going from 2 Republican US senators to now 2 Democratic US senators, almost half of our executive branch is Democrats. The majority of our congressional delegation is Democrats. And so it's been very exhausting fighting the attacks on the LGBTQ community this legislative session, fighting the attacks on reproductive health care, fighting the attacks, what happened in Georgia. The key difference in Arizona is that the Republicans split it in a bunch of little bills to make it harder to track instead of this big omnibus proposal, but they're coming after your voting rights. They're trying to make it harder for you to vote. In fact, the chairman of the Government and Elections Commission, John Kavanaugh, was nationally called out for saying Jim Crow arguments like people shouldn't vote and we have to look at the quality of the votes, which is just outrageous. But without that, as has been brought up multiple times in this discussion, the Republicans can't win on these issues. These are not popular issues in terms of whether or not the public wants to live in a society where their children aren't getting medically accurate, comprehensive sex education. The vast majority of Americans want to live in a society where abortion care is safe and legal, and furthermore, where politicians aren't meddling in that and judging and trying to impose their belief system on them. The vast majority of Americans want elected officials to make it easier, not harder to vote. And the only reason that Arizona is in the position where we are at, and the only reason that we literally are able to stop some of these really, really bad bills. I mean, we might not stop all of them, but I feel pretty confident that we're going to stop many of these repressive and oppressive measures by the conservative majority, is because over this past decade after SB 1070, the Mayan saying of, tú eres mi otro yo, you are my other self, you are my other half, cannot ring more true. We cannot do it alone. And we need people to stand up who traditionally don't advocate for reproductive health care, just like we need people to stand up who don't traditionally advocate for immigrant justice or police reform or any of these issues. Like, we are a movement. And I think that's what's proving success in Arizona. And I think that's what is so exciting about this moment, in spite of having to deal with these bills that they were dropping back when they were in the supermajority. And it's just kind of, to me, it's their last breath, their last attempt at holding control and power on all of our lives because of who we are, instead of what we will see in the future, which is a government that embraces all of us and empowers all of us to determine our own self-determination.
Comments from Representative West and Senator Marty about, are you seeing a broader justice movement out there that's not as siloed as might have been a decade ago?
Yes, I will say that. And given that both of the 2 representatives are relatively new, I'll mention, I think particularly in the last 4 years, Representative Salman came in the same year the Trump administration, but the people elected since that time, they seem to be people who got elected. They were politically active before, but Trump got elected, and all of a sudden they said, hey, things are going off the rails here. We got to get 6, 7, 8 more notches involved than we've been in the past. We're going to run for office. And they're not getting elected in order to get reelected. They're getting elected to do something. And I think there's a lot more passion in the elected officials. That's a wonderful change. I think there's a lot growing knowledge. I mean, on reproductive health issues, think of how much change there's been since Roe v. Wade. now every woman of reproductive age is in an age that they were born long after Roe. And if they saw the Republican agenda of trying to repeal Roe, they would be horrified. What? We can't live that way. But the other change that's happened is really a growing knowledge in the society of differences between people, and the LGBTQ fights of the last 15 years. I offered LGBTQ marriage equality legislation in 2008, and I got so much hate mail at the time. And 5 years later, we passed a law to allow it. And you look at that change, and I think all of that understanding of human sexuality has grown so much that I think Representative Salman's right. I think we're on the cusp of seeing some real change. And Representative West, I really hope, I mean, yeah, you said, hey, we're in that lucky position where we can do that. And I really excited to see, because I think good things can be happening now.
Yeah, definitely. I find it comical, and I'm thankful. I'm going to say something that you guys might find funny, but I thank Trump because his racist, restrictive, "Make America Great Again" slogan really made America great. Because people's like, oh no, we're not gonna stand for this. We're not gonna tolerate this, and people decided to step out and run for office to combat the restrictiveness and the limitations that the Trump administration was putting forth. And now more diversity is running for office. Transgender people, the LGBTQ community is running for office, are members of Biden's administration. And so it blew up in their face, and it really made America great, because we're working on diversifying our government. We're working on being more inclusive, because that's exactly what the Trump administration did not want. So thank you. And now our Republican Party is chaotic, and they're having an identity crisis. So while they're working through that, we're going to make sure that we're doing what we can for housing, for immigration, for voting rights. Going back to Illinois, while things were happening in Georgia, we passed an expansive, comprehensive voting rights in Illinois that protected vote by mail, that protected that kept it more comprehensive and expansive, and we passed it in a bipartisan way. We have Republicans who voted for it, and it was quite unique, because those are the same Republicans who wanted to make it more restrictive. And so while they're doing that, we're going to keep doing what we can throughout this whole nation on being more inclusive, on stepping out of our fears and our comfort zones, and having those who we are not accustomed to seeing in office, having them in office because they're advocating for the right people and they're doing the right things. And that's what is going to make our country so much more effective, so much more encouraging and great. So I'm excited for what the future has to hold for all of this.
Great. Well, thank you. You're also really making Illinois sound like the promised land, I have to tell you.
Yeah.
We're going to go to your questions again, and we have about 10 minutes before we close. And
so Nancy, if we could respond to the two that have six six upvotes, and just one of our panelists respond to each of those questions.
Okay, that's a math problem. All right, so we've got one response to each question. You'll have to battle it out between the three of you. First question is, have you ever reached out to obtain the support of the business community in your districts on sexual and reproductive rights issues? And if so, what was your experience like?
My answer is simple. No, I haven't.
Okay,
yeah, let's go to the next one.
Apparently there's an enormous amount of work that can be done in this arena. So great question. Question, I'm in a very red state. Why does it not seem to matter to anti-abortion legislators that their restrictions don't really reduce abortion as much as sexuality education or access to birth control could. They can't even seem to have that conversation. Why other, not the question, but right, asking why is it that that conversation isn't going on? Why can't we reach across a divide on this issue and say, can't we agree on those things?
It's a great question, and the answer is I don't know. I think they are so intent that it's almost a fear of sexuality stuff. If we talk about family planning, if we talk about education, oh, this can make young kids do terrible things. That's not the way it works. I mean, I think Representative Salman mentioned earlier, one of you did, Nancy, about how in European countries, they have much better education about sexuality and much lower unintended pregnancy rates, much lower sexually transmitted infections rates. Education works and family planning services work and they save money. And that's why I keep pushing our abortion prevention legislation, because it would do more than all the restrictions they can put out there to prevent abortion. Because women that don't get pregnant unintended, you're still going to have emergency cases and cases where people are desperate, but most cases are very preventable if we do this. So I think the answer is that's the issue we have to focus on. The people who say they think abortion is terrible, they want to stop it. Well, our proposals will do more than anything they're talking about, saying we're going to make it so abortion providers have to work in hospitals, have to do everything else. That does nothing to prevent abortions. That makes bigger hassles and makes them more dangerous. It doesn't prevent. So the question's right on the mark.
And final, we're going to be closing soon, so how about a final comment from on anything in this broad topic that you would like from Representative West and also from Representative Salman?
Well, first, I just want to thank you for this honor of being a panelist alongside with Representative Salman and Senator Marty. And I just thank you for, I've taken notes myself from both of you on what I can bring to the table here in Illinois. I'll just go back to what I just said just a minute ago. I'm really excited to see the change and the shift in what people will be looking for in their elected officials. They'll be looking for people of substance. Senator Marty, you mentioned it the best. Take away this talking point, and what do the Republicans have when it comes to the pro-life versus pro-choice battle? Individuals will start looking for substance, people who are standing up for certain beliefs and certain systems for the sake of people and not just for the sake of party, are people who are more inclusive and loving beyond the church, beyond whatever religion that they are in, for the sake of being inclusive and loving, people who are of substance rather than of fluff. And so I'm really excited to see how that transpires. I hope for the best for you, Senator Marty in Minnesota, you, Representative Salman in Arizona, that you keep up the fight. And to Nancy and Reverend Jackson, thank you for all that you do. And I look forward to a long-lasting relationship with every single one of you.
Thank you so much again for having me on the panel this afternoon. I cannot describe enough how refreshing it is to be in spaces like this, especially with like-minded colleagues, Representative West and Senator Marty, because it helps me in a state like Arizona dream about what our future could look like, and maybe our pit stop is Minnesota on our way to being like Illinois. And Nancy and Dr. Reverend Jackson, I just cannot thank you enough for creating this space. I think at the end of the day, my biggest lesson for all of our civil rights that we're fighting for here in Arizona that are constantly being rolled back, diminished, and just under attack by the conservative majority is everyone everyone needs to be a part of this conversation, including the stakeholders, like from the business community, including folks from the religious community, the interfaith community on this topic, including, you know, in states like mine, like we got to start putting prosecutors and law enforcement on the spot, right? Everyone needs to be in this conversation. Because at the end of the day, and just coming from a state where most of my job is stopping bad things from becoming law, the reality is it will not just impact that one individual and their doctor. It's going to impact a whole ecosystem. And the more we can think about these issues intersectionally, and the more that we can call out powerful stakeholders who remain silent on the sidelines and pretend like this isn't their problem too, the better we are in the future. And for those of you in states like mine, stopping bad things, but for those of you who are in states like Minnesota or Illinois, laying the groundwork to pass some marvelous and wonderful things that could really help our communities in the future.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to turn this back over to Reverend Jackson, but really pleased to have all of you here today. Also, to a reminder for people watching that you need to also call and thank, you know, your state legislators who are out there fighting the good fight and standing up. I think we heard in today's conversation, they hear a lot from the other side. Always important to remember, whether it's in Washington, in Congress, or in your home state. Let the people who are out there putting themselves on the line, putting themselves out there, thank them for what they're doing, you know, win or lose. Back to you, Reverend Jackson.
So I am over the top excited by this conversation today. It is so important that we create more spaces like these. One, to encourage those who are so often getting death threats on our behalf. I just want to say that. And I think it was Representative West who talked about moral courage. We are in an era where we're dealing with a lot of moral vigilantism from those who think they know right, that their one way should be imposed on everyone else. And it behooves all of us to stand up for a morality that is not about oppression and supremacy, but one that is about inclusion and equality, one that is about affirming the human dignity of all people. And we've got to be loud and vocal about that. And so I think we heard in this conversation today, it is not acceptable that there be thousands of people who are coming to foster oppression and injustice, and there's only a few of us speaking loudly on behalf of justice. We all have to speak very, very loudly. And I especially appeal to those of you who identify as people of faith, because it is often the case that the narrative is that people of faith really are in many ways anti-justice, and that really is not true. All of the data, all of the polling data show the contrary. It's just that we've been too quiet. And Martin Luther King Jr. talked many years ago about the silence and the quiet of those who intend good. And then the HIV/AIDS movement also talked about how silence is death. We are at a critical moment right now where we need all of us to speak up and speak loudly on behalf of justice in a very intersectional way. Education is important. We need people to understand the value of that and understand that in this era that we're in, there is a anti-democratic and a Christian dominionism that are marrying each other right now. And we're going to do a webinar on that this summer, talking about the dominionist movement among Christians. We have a lot of exciting things coming, and we really hope that you will avail yourselves of the incredible learning opportunities that the Religion and Repro Learning Center is offering. And we're doing it from a very intersectional way, because that is absolutely critical. We're so excited that you have joined us and that you've stayed with us for this time. And if I may call you by your first names, because you're my family, and that is Athena and Maurice and John and Nancy, thank you. And I really am moved to tears. I'm a very, very passionate person. I'm really moved to tears because of the work that you do on our behalf. It matters and you matter. And I thank you. I thank you. I bless you. And it's not just those words. And I appreciate what you said, Maurice, earlier about sometimes you speak, but the goal is to live it. And thank you. May it be so that we all live what we say we believe in. And if that is justice, that we really live that. And that's not something that we just get automatically. We really have to work for it. And thank you so very, very much. Blessings to you all, and see you very, very soon. Oh, this video will be available in early next week for those of you who want to watch it again or who want to share it with your loved ones, your friends, and your enemies, because they might need some education around this too. Blessings, because we really are all one family. Thank you so very much.